Hi, I'm Andrew Kadima.
Nobody cares.
Shh. So for the past 6 months to about a year, I've been working on this really long, hard project of trying to completely fill out a sketchbook, all with oil paintings. And I say it's a hard project because I think we all know or have experienced the difficulties that come with trying to actually finish our sketchbooks. Like sometimes you get halfway through and then you just get so burnt out on it, but you still really want to finish, so you kind of let the quality slip a little bit. Or sometimes you get like 10 pages in and you feel real good about what you've done, but then one day you just close the book and before you know it, 100 years goes by and you never open it again. I'll finish it someday. And a sketchbook could mean so many different things to different people. Like maybe it's something you just travel with, so you always have something to doodle in. Or it's that thing that you just get all your ideas out onto as soon as they pop into your head. But for me, this project has kind of been about creating a collection of fully realized oil paintings with a lot of effort behind them. And through the whole process, I've been imagining this final product as like a little gallery that you can kind of hold in your hands. And the experience of flipping through it, I just think could be so fun and cool. And whenever I've shared these sketchbook oil paintings on various social medias, I get tons of questions about the process of actually painting in a sketchbook. And so many people are like, you could do that? I didn't know you could paint with oils in a sketchbook. So I thought, why not take you all with me? And we paint the next page in my sketchbook together. And I'll go through the whole process, so there'll be a section for preparing the actual page for painting, then the painting section, and then I'll even go into what I do with the sketchbook after I finish painting it, because it's wet. What do you do? So I'll definitely go over that as well. And as usual, this video is going to be disgustingly, horribly, grotesquely long. So I encourage you to bust out your sketchbook too and draw or paint along with me. Or just chill, grab your space worms if you've got them and just relax for a couple hours. So let's just get right into preparing our page for painting. So this is the sketchbook that I've been using, and it's the Moleskine art book. More specifically, I think it's the watercolor art book that they have, and it's just filled with, sturdy, thick watercolor paper. And you can see, as I've been painting, it's getting quite chunky. Not only the thickness of the paint, but the primer on each page is really making it look like it's going to just explode any second here. These are some of the previous paintings that I've done. I kind of want to wait to do a full tour when it's all complete. It's going to be a really fun video to make. But this is the most recent painting that I completed. And at this point, I've waited about 1.5 weeks to let it dry. And I'm confident now that it's sufficiently dry that I can fold it over. And I don't have to worry about it sort of transferring onto the back of the previous page at all. So I just like to make a pretty, reasonable crease there to kind of influence the page to fold that way. And you can see it's still bending up a lot. So it's a good idea to get like just a little bit of a weight to put on that page to hold it down while you work on the next one. And the first thing I like to add is some GAC 100. And really all you need is some kind of acrylic primer or size, something to separate the paper from coming into contact with the oil paint itself. And I like to squeeze it directly on, oop, nobody saw that. And I like to squeeze a good amount of it onto the paper itself, enough to make sure that I'm going to get a full coverage of the whole page. If you end up putting a little bit too much, it's no big deal. It's very easy to kind of scrape off as you're spreading it around the paper. And to spread it around the paper, I like to use a soft but firm synthetic brush. And I like to use one that's pretty small. Like notice how small this seems in relation to the size of the paper. You could use a giant brush the size of the paper, just kind of squeegee it on there. But one thing that really annoys me and just disturbs me about paintings is when you can see like a real even pattern from the surface come through the oil painting itself. Like if you see like the weave of a canvas popping through the painting, that just like annoys me to death. So if you use like a bigger brush, you get a more even stroke pattern. By using the smaller brush, it kind of adds that little bit of a chaos into the finish and just helps break things up a bit. But you can see I'm just trying to get as even as I possibly can and really making sure that I get complete coverage of the entire surface of the paper. Because if we leave any spot uncovered, then it kind of defeats the purpose of putting this stuff on at all, because we're really just trying to make sure that the oil doesn't soak into the paper, and that oil is going to take so long to evaporate that it could start degrading the paper and ruin the painting. So I'm just trying to get edge-to-edge coverage, scumbling here and there to kind of break up as many even brush strokes as possible. And some final smooth, soft, light brush strokes to try and get that perfect finish. And that's about it for the coverage part. And because we got so close to the edges with the gack, I like to lift up the page and run my thumb across the edge of it, just to clear up any excess that kind of spilled over there, because it'll be a real pain in the butt if it dries and sticks to the page behind it. And then we have to unstick it later. Really, really difficult. And because the whole book is layered there, I just go through all the pages and make sure they're pretty clean. And then we just wait for it to dry. And the drying process is pretty quick. This stuff dries really, really fast. You could probably honestly get away with a couple hours. But I waited a day. I got other projects to work on, so it kind of works out. So this is after a day of waiting, and you can see the finish is super nice, very kind of luster, shine almost to it. Very nice pliability to the page. Feels really, really nice in hand. And you could actually start painting on this right away, but I like to also add on top of that gack a layer of gesso. And, it just kind of gives you, for me, it feels nicer to paint on the gesso than on the gack itself. And for the gesso, I like to use the thickest gesso I could possibly find. And I like to use a palette knife to kind of scoop it out initially and then plop it onto the paper, kind of like, icing a cake. And, it makes me hungry every time I look at this. Just imagine that's icing. But I like to load it up at the top of the page, kind of spackle it around a little bit, but really make sure the heft of it is at the top of the page, because we're going to end up spreading it from the top down to the bottom of the paper. And how much do you put on? Really depends what you're looking for. You don't want to go too thick maybe, because it'll end up taking a longer time to dry, but definitely enough to get full coverage of the paper. And I like to get enough in there that smooths out the texture of the tooth of the paper. And if you get too much on there, it's pretty easy to scrape off as you're spreading it, especially if you use this handy little rubbery, bendy, pliable scraper squeegee thing with this really nice tapered edge. It's really perfect for spreading thicker grounds or gessos on surfaces. And just like a squeegee, you kind of hold it pretty parallel to the page, actually, and spread it up and down, left and right, just making sure you get as full coverage as you possibly can. You don't want to hold it too perpendicular to the paper, because then you end up just kind of scraping all the gesso straight off of it. And you could spend forever adding more, taking off, adding more, taking off. I know I've gotten into that cycle before. But once I get some pretty good coverage, I go over with some final scrapes, try to even things out as best I can. I bend it a little bit to make sure I don't get these like edge lines where the edges of the squeegee kind of digs into the gesso. And just like with the gack, I like to clean up the edges as best I can, running my finger along the bottom of the page where any excess gesso may have like spilled over. This is almost even worse, right? If this dries from page to page, you're almost guaranteed to get like a tear. And I like to go just through every page. It's actually super satisfying to break apart these papers that have already started to kind of stick or glue to each other. And just going through all the edges, making sure I clean up as much as I possibly can. Really just saving yourself from a bunch of pain later on. And that's it. Now all that's left is to wait for it to dry. And the drying process for this is a lot longer than with the gack. You probably should wait at least 24 hours for this gesso to dry. And this is after a day here, and very nice finish. Definitely sufficiently dry, ready to work on. And I like to do one final look through of all the pages, because you miss some gesso, it's sneaky stuff. It gets in there. But separating these pages, the day after is not hard at all if you did the work of cleaning up right while you were gessoing. And there we go. Our sketchbook is ready for the next painting. And you can see the previous page, Biff, sitting pretty, totally fine. Nothing wrong. No transfer onto the previous page. Looks great. No issues whatsoever. So let's go ahead, turn the page, and start on our new painting. So no surprises or tips or tricks here. Just slap the sketchbook on the easel, open to the page you're going to be working on, and clamp it down. Now you could go crazy with the clamping, and just put a ton of clamps all over the edge of the paper, kind of like, torture devices around the sketchbook. But it becomes so like intrusive, it intrudes on the space that you're actually going to be working on. It gives you less visual of like the whole paper, and you got to dodge it with your brush. So it's kind of annoying, and the single clamp up there has always done me well, except for one time when it failed me and popped off. But I'd much rather take that single clamp up there than any extra little security from all the other clamps that end up getting in your way. But painting in a sketchbook, it's like painting anything else. There's nothing special or interesting or secret about it, really. If you put that layer of gesso on there, it's basically like painting any other gessoed surface for the most part. Now, if you paint just on the gack, or you're a little adventurous and you paint on the bare paper itself, which you can do. I've done that before. It's just a little bit riskier, and you're kind of gambling with the longevity of your painting. But if you paint those ways, that paper is super absorbent. It's going to suck up all your paint. So you feel like you need to get a lot of paint on your brush, like you're painting with a wet mop, to really kind of get things going. But if you're painting on the gesso, totally fine. I feel like I'm painting any other surface for the most part. And because I'm painting a portrait, I start it like I would any other portrait, and I pick sort of a central feature that's easy to describe. The inside of the eyes is usually what it ends up being, or the eyebrows casting a shadow. And starting that way kind of not only helps you get right into the important features of the face, but it also helps you establish positionally where everything's going to be on the canvas, on the surface. And here, the real challenge in painting the sketchbook is that you have this tiny little surface that's enclosed that you have to work into. So you got to really make sure that proportionally everything is correct. You're going to have to paint a very small face, and you don't want to have it where the edges of the face are butting up right against the edges of the paper, and it looks like a severed head in a jar or something like that, which could be cool for some things, but not what I'm looking for here. And here I'm painting a kind of a classic Western style villain, a real black hat kind of villain from an old classic movie. And I really wanted to tap into that classic Western aesthetic with like really warm, super saturated colors, lots of reds and yellows. And I also kind of wanted to hint at the sort of vintage movie poster style, lots of illustrative kind of influences. So in my mind, I'm always thinking patchwork, mosaic, colors laying next to each other, rather than worrying about like blending very smoothly or having very gradual transitions between values. If there are some hard edges here and there, that's okay. That's what I'm looking for. And you can already see those skin tones that I'm pulling out there, very, very warm, right? And this part of the face is actually going to be shadow underneath a hat that he's wearing. So this is like the darker area that I'm starting in, and it's very, very warm. And I guess, since the painting process is typical, it's like any other painting process that I've gone over, I'll talk a little bit about the sketchbook in general, how it started, where it is right now, and where it's going in the future. But the origins of it are, I really wanted something to be easy for myself. I was appealing to my lazy inner being, and I wanted like relief from any pressure of a project being important or, needing to be perfect. So it really was a place that I wanted to just kind of go away and hide in, and be able to kind of be experimental a little bit, and low stakes kind of effort, really a sketch, right? And it was a place where I really wanted to work on being a little bit looser in my approach too. as artists, especially painters, I feel like we're always kind of looking for ways to loosen ourselves up a little bit. The deeper we get into sort of technical study, the tighter we tend to become, and we lose a lot of this sort of, suggestive qualities that we have, not being super overly descriptive and just kind of, giving suggestions to the viewer, like, hey, here, boom, here's that, you figure it out, and it's amazing how that really jumps up the quality, in my opinion, of a piece. And it does lend to it being a lot more personal and expressive and interesting. So the first painting that I ever painted in the sketchbook, it was a photo that I had saved on my phone. If I'm ever like doom scrolling, 2 a.m. at night, I doom scroll for like at least 6 hours, probably, wasting my life away. Certainly not sleeping. And if I ever come across something interesting, I'll save it and put it in a folder of references that I can always go to and refer to later on. Because let's be honest, I'll be honest about my process. Whenever I go and I'm off to paint and I don't have a perfectly clear laid out idea of what it is I'm going to do, I spend twice as long thinking about what to do than actually painting. It's amazing how that works out. I think, just creative endeavors in general, we tend to be more thinkers than doers somehow, even though the painting is a doer's kind of thing. But that first painting was a picture that I had saved of the character M. Bison from the Street Fighter movie. It's like a 90s movie. Horrible, terrible, awful movie. Just atrocious, You couldn't make much worse of a movie, to be honest. And except for the character that I painted, who was portrayed by the actor Raul Julia, who's like a great stage actor, great, amazing actor, And this role was actually his last role. It's kind of a sad story. I think he was diagnosed with cancer like right before they started filming. And, he filmed the whole movie, and I think he died before he ever saw the final release, and it ended up being his last movie. It's kind of tragic that this amazing actor had this horrendous, awful movie as his last movie. But I think he took the role because his kids were interested in the subject material. And he really did like an awesome, amazing acting job. It's one of those classic villainous roles, really over the top and really sold it. Very, just a classic performance. It's worth watching the movie for that, I guess. And so I painted that character. It was a really cool photo. He had a hat that was casting a shadow over his eyes, and his eyes were really piercing out of that shadow. Very, very fun reference. I'm a sucker for a reference with costume, Very fun to paint costumes. Anyway, so I painted that, and it was exactly what I wanted it to be. Quick, easy, low pressure, very expressive and kind of looser style than I was used to, or than I typically did. And it came out really well. I liked it. It was a fun experiment. It looked cool to have the oil paints in the sketchbook. And then the next page that I painted was an orc from the movie Lord of the Rings, and also exactly what I wanted it to be: quick, easy, loose. And that one I actually painted on the paper without priming it at all. And it's interesting; you can see the difference in the paintings. That one's very chalky and dry, and has a totally different texture to it than the other paintings. And then the third painting I painted was this photo I had also saved from a doom scrolling adventure of a character from the Dick Tracy movie called Littleface. And it was such an awesome reference, really cool visual. He had this like insane prosthetic to like balloon his head out a ton. And really the one thing that really caught my eye about that was the orange suit that he was wearing. It was like this bold orange colored suit. And I thought, oh man, I know exactly what I want to do to paint that. Do you ever have those moments where like you see something or you see a reference and it's just like clicks immediately, like, oh, I know what to do there. I know exactly how I'm going to lay the paint down and everything. And that one came out great too. I thought, very fun, and it was also pretty easy and loose, maybe a little bit tighter than the others, but still very loose. But then I looked at those three first pages that I did as a collective. I stood back and I was like, oh, dang, I'm painting all movie villains. And, something that I didn't intend to do at all. It was like completely by chance that theme popped up. But then I thought, okay, let's go, let's stick with that thing. Sometimes the world presents you with things that you don't intend, and you got to take them and run with them. So that's what I thought. Okay, this book is going to be totally movie villains, filled with movie villains, or villains, I should say. I have kind of leaked out into other forms of media, but just villains in general is the theme. And at that point, things started to turn upside down a little bit, and that was scary. And the pressure that I kind of wanted to lose and drop off of myself came swelling up on this project now. And all of a sudden, this project became the most stressful one because I was painting classic movie villains or movie villains that people would recognize. And, they have some attachment or, emotional reaction to these characters, right? They've lived with them or grown up with them, or, they have a real like for them. And, you have some responsibility as the painter to show that, this is the person, right? There's some responsibility to get some likeness in there. And of course, for me, at least, likeness is like the biggest pressure thing in painting. It's the thing that I have to like really, really hone in and focus on to make sure that I'm getting right. It's not something that comes just effortlessly and natural, it's impossible for it to be that way. So it's the one thing that you really have to kind of make sure you're checking against things and, mentally measuring all the time and kind of evaluating. So that's what kind of turned around a little bit. And it's kind of funny. It's interesting. It started out as like this easy, escape. And now it's the most pressure-filled project that I'm working on, probably. But I'm deep into it now, and it's so exciting to get close to the edge. Oh man, I can't tell you, like each page that goes by, I just get so excited about seeing that final finished sketchbook. It's gonna be so cool to me. And it's a ton of paintings. I think it's got to be like 50-ish paintings, somewhere close to that. So it'll be so cool. Anyway, so this painting that I'm doing here is, like I said, classic Western. It's from an old movie called Once Upon a Time in the West. And it's the oldest movie that I've done a character from, or it's second oldest. The oldest is Norman Bates from Psycho. But this one's very close in time period. But, I wanted to get something a little bit more classic in there. A lot of these villains are villains that I know from my childhood, or that I know from my older brother, or that, are just more recent kind of characters from recent movies. So I wanted to reach back, expand a little bit more. There's no reason to keep everything too up to date or too recent. And I'd never done like a Western aesthetic in it, right? It's a very different aesthetic than all the other characters that I've been painting. So I chose this one. The character's name is Frank. It's one of the all-time great Western movies, and I'm going to be honest, I'd never seen this movie before painting this. I'd heard of it. It's obviously like a name that kind of rings familiar to me. But one of the things that I think is really important for an artist is if you're kind of working with a source material, you got to research, you got to make sure that you invest time into thinking and considering that material, find some personal connection to it in some way to kind of work yourself into it, get some perspective, put your perspective on it. And it's just fun to like watch a movie like this. I got to say, like, it's so aesthetically removed from nowadays. It's a real time travel to watch an older movie, a classic movie, but still a great movie. Super super interesting. And the character, whose name is Frank, is it's actually pretty interesting. He's played by an actor named Henry Fonda, and that actor is like, I guess he was like big leading man back in the day. Very like sort of golden age or 60s, I guess, and 50s maybe, and always kind of like heroic, I guess. He was always the good guy, and in this movie he's the villain. And I can't remember if this was like the only villain he ever really played, like super villain kind of, but at least like one of the very few times that he did. So it was this kind of cool, interesting thing. But yeah, so Cool movie, very interesting. This one's good. Street Fighter is not. But yeah, and like I said before, I'm tapping into that style of real saturated warmth. And obviously this movie is like so saturated. It's like really warm. It's really high contrast. Could also have something to do with the age of it, however it was like preserved or anything, and whatever version I watched, But so I'm trying to capture that, and I'm even trying to like push it, exaggerate a little bit more into that direction, making it maybe a little bit warmer even than it needs to be, a little bit more vibrant, so that you can see his skin like real leathery, it looks high noon right now, and he's about to go to a gun battle out in the city center. But the colors I used for this is my typical palette, which is a great palette for like very warm kind of feel. And it's titanium white, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, ultramarine blue. I also use like a couple darker reds, like alizarin crimson and ivory black. So those cadmiums, the red and yellow cadmiums, especially really lend themselves well to this kind of aesthetic. Now, previously I'd said that I was kind of also tapping into this vintage movie poster kind of style. It's kind of interesting because recently I did a poster for a show for HBO, and that was super fun. A full painted poster, hand painted poster, something that's like very, very rare these days. I've done a few movie posters before, and some of them, you get to like, you work on it for a while. You get to like the final stages. You get a full, complete painting. You're psyched about the painting, and the creative team that you've worked with from the production company looks at it, and they say it looks good. They approve it. They're working for you too. And then at the last second, boom, it all gets like snatched up and replaced by just like a photo still from the movie, and it's like insanely airbrushed and just makes you sad as the artist because it's just so like, I don't know, feels typical maybe, not very interesting maybe. But you kind of understand it too. I guess they're making calculations about what's gonna get people interested the most, and I guess their concern is like just to say this person's in the movie. Boom, that's all you need to know. But it's kind of sad, it's almost a lost art. If you look at a lot of these classic movie posters, some of them are so cool and so like eye-catching and interesting, and they make you think like, man, I would go see that movie just for that visual, that poster. It's moving me that direction. And there are still posters like that, of course. I feel like a lot of horror movies still have some great posters to them. Maybe because the imagery that they have to work with just by nature is a little bit more interesting, a little bit more challenging. And maybe they're not so like movie star focused all the time that they don't have to, pander to that too much, like the popularity of the actor. But yeah, that was a fun experience. Kudos to HBO for letting me do that and actually putting out a hand-painted poster for something. Very cool. But yeah, hoping for a resurgence in that kind of hand-painted style. Painting is going well. Finishing up kind of the main part of the face. I paint portraits a little bit weirdly. I paint everything a little bit strangely, I guess. Tiny bit unorthodox, where I kind of start from the middle and then work my way out, like a kind of almost like you drop something and then it starts spreading. And that takes me to the boundaries of the face here for the most part. Obviously, I still have some to do. Like I'm putting in the hair right now to kind of really refine that boundary. And as I'm working, I'm always constantly refining the boundaries of the face, just because there's always more that you're putting on, and it always gives you an opportunity to kind of cut away if you need to. Like if you've made the cheeks too thick, you can then cut them away when you add the background in, for instance. So there's always safety nets with oil paintings. An oil painting is so hard to completely lose in oil painting forever. A lot of people are real timid painters, especially in the beginning. They're really worried about making mistakes that they think are unrecoverable. And a lot of the times, artists, painters get into oil painting from a background of drawing or sketching, pen, whatever. And, with the pen especially, there are issues with making mistakes that are then difficult to get rid of. If you're drawing with a pencil, sometimes it's difficult, even though we have erasers. Depends on how you draw. There are marks that you could make that are going to be difficult to get away entirely. So there's this idea that the permanence of the oil paint makes it even more sort of stressful to make a mistake. But the reality is, it's easier to make a mistake in oil paint and then kind of correct it. You always have the opportunity to smoosh and whoosh things around and cover things up, especially if you're painting from darker to light, right? It's easier to kind of intrude on a darker color than sort of put a dark color into a light color. Very difficult to work backwards that way. But yeah, so now I'm working on the extra parts of the face of the portrait, the neck, the shoulders. Boring. It's amazing how that happens. Like I focus so hard on like the face and all these like little detailed features, and then when it comes to like the surrounding stuff, the background or the body, sometimes even sometimes the hair, I just get so, do I have to do this kind of thing? And I kind of don't slack really, but like it's parts where I'm actually consciously comfortable with being less descriptive. You do want the focus to be on the portrait. So if the surrounding areas are less detailed, it is going to move the viewer's eye to the important parts that you're describing more carefully. And here I'm finally adding in that little bit more suggestion of the hat actually being there. And the hat is a part where I want it to be really bold, kind of flat. If you ever have an opportunity to put in a really flat, big, bold color shape into your delicately painted portrait, it's always such a cool kind of dichotomy, So I'm going to try and keep this hat pretty flat and just really think about this general shape of it rather than putting in a bunch of little details to describe it so perfectly. And then after that, I'm going to put a blue background. That's going to really offset the very warm face kind of in a nice, interesting way, I think. And then I'll have to do, well, I guess before I do the background, I'm going to add in the final sort of details of the face. And those will be really fun. Those are my favorite parts. It's sort of like the icing on the cake. You've done all the calculations to get the perfect batter and, bake it the perfect amount of time. And then when you get that cake out and everything's looking good, where the structure is, where everything's going to be, then you get to kind of exercise your creativity and put in all those little decorations and icing everywhere. So I'm already thinking about that while I'm painting this. I know in my mind, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get to those highlighted parts. You can see where I left the cheek completely bare. I haven't painted anything there, and the upper lip and the bottom lip there. Those are parts where I know I want the highlight to be really powerful. So I'm going to make sure that there aren't a lot of colors like intruding on each other, bleeding into each other. And that highlight's going to be very pure there. And it's also going to add to his kind of texture of his skin, the sweatiness, the sort of, feel like it's hot outside. But there's that hat, right? Very bold, plain shape, not a lot of shading to it. I'll add some, a little reflection of the light on the top of the brim of the hat. Maybe make the hat a little bit wider, just kind of exaggerate things a little bit there. And I'm also kind of limiting the size of it a little bit. You can see the shadow of that clamp is kind of messing things up a little bit. And there's going to be a point where I finally take that clamp off and paint into that area. But yeah, there's that highlight on top of the brim to show that it's extending outwards. And you can see, look at underneath the hat, right? That sort of stripe there, that's the shadow cast from the hat. Now, obviously, he's got a light coming from below him. It could be the sun bouncing off the sand or something like that, or street. But there is some amount of light source bouncing up into his face. And then there's, of course, the sun coming down from the top. So there are competing light sources, which make it so the shadow cast by the hat is not incredibly aggressive. It's a little bit more subtle. Obviously, the closer it gets to the hat, where less light is ever going to reach. It gets darker and darker there. But generally, that shadow cast over the eyes is not so aggressive. And you can see right where the eyebrow is, it kind of is, there's just very warm strip of color, saturated color. And I love that. That was something that I saw and I was like, okay, we got to put that in, accentuate that, exaggerate that really warm strip there. Now, adding in the eyes, super blue eyes. This guy had crazy blue eyes. That could also be it could have been changed a little bit or exaggerated by the virtue of the filming, preservation, or whatever kind of transfer that they did, or whatever, right? Because it's filmed on old film, I'm sure. So there was some translation process there that had to happen to digitize it, and sometimes it does weird things to the colors. But his eyes are very piercing blue, and it's always interesting because that makes it difficult sometimes between that and the whites of the eyes. Like, what's the value difference there? So there's a very delicate balance there. You don't want to make either of those too bright and offset the other too much. Here I'm adding some highlights on the opposite side of the face, the shadow side of the face, where there's less light catching it. And it's a portrait that has like a competing light sources, kind of, right? There's a light source coming from the his right side, page left, and then another brighter light source coming from page right. And it's always cool to find those, and it really makes you be more specific about your highlights, because we're always so tempted to just blast out those highlights, super bright all the time. But here, you got to be a little bit more subtle with the highlights, because some of them are definitely going to be darker and brighter than others. So really got to be careful there. Now, obviously, that light is going to cast from his cheek, where there's no paint right now, down onto his lip, down onto the chin. So I'm working on all those little highlighted areas right now. Adding brighter and brighter values, and stepping up gradually. I'm not going to the bright stuff right away, even though I feel that it's going to be there, right? Some parts I know, I'm putting mental notes like, okay, get really bright there. But I'm not going too quickly, because you can never take it, or you could take it back, but it's going to be a pain to really take it back, right? Like I said, working from light to dark, very odd, right? Difficult because of the way the paint mixes. And the sort of the mixture, it's really the amount of light color versus dark color in your mixtures that makes it difficult to work backwards like that. And you can see there, that little highlight on the nose, that's that opposing light source, the darker of the highlights. And later on, we're going to have a highlight on the other side of the nose, this one here going at the top and along the sort of bridge in the nose. That's going to be a really bright one. It's going to help us give shape to the nose. Up until this point, the nose was really kind of amorphous, not really shaped very well. And adding in these highlights is really going to start to define exactly what's going on there. And the way that I got to that sort of amorphous quality of the nose is, I was really thinking about, like I said, that patchwork mosaic kind of style, illustrative style. I was thinking, look at a color, look at the reference, cite a color, say, this is that color, mix it and put it down. Don't even think about larger shapes or think about what you're painting almost, That's such a great exercise. Don't think all about what you're painting. Just this color goes here, that color goes here, that color goes there, that color goes there. And try and be kind of quick with it and just put them down. And then as time passes, it's amazing how the portrait will start to come clearer and clearer and clearer, and you'll see more and more of what's actually going on. So that's kind of the style that was in my head, or the process that was in my head while I was painting this. You can really see, even though we're missing those brightest highlights, that nose, the depth in that nose has really popped out for these last couple strokes here that we put in there. And working on this crow's feet here, these like deep crow's feet. Oh, here's the bright highlight on that side of the nose. It really just pulls it out even more, huh? Some little highlights underneath the nose. Sometimes there's moisture underneath there. And even just the muzzle area in general, if there's stubble and stuff like that, doing little tick, 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 tiny highlights can help add those little kind of details that help bring it to the next level. A little bit of textural interest. And there's a bright highlight on the bottom lip there. And, you can see the orange underneath the lip and on the bottom of the chin. That's that bounce light coming up. Very kind of saturated light, which is very, very fun to paint. A lot of cadmium red and cadmium yellow in there. And brightening up the side of the cheek there. You can see that sort of jawline there is a little bit too yellow. Don't mind it too much, though, actually, because we want that very kind of leathery quality, that very saturated quality to the skin, like he's been baking out in the sun. And of course, I'm saving this cheek highlight. That's going to be the biggest highlight of the whole painting. For me, I'm already thinking about it, pulling everything together, kind of really showing where that definite line on where the cheek turns, where the cheekbone is. Get it, like we did with the nose, adding structure to the face there. It's amazing. The whole length of the portrait, it was so general. Oh, here's that single stroke. Oh, miracle moments. Love those. But of course, I couldn't be satisfied with it. And I had to go in and mess it up. Add more finesse. But I think I could have left it there and it would have had it as good of an impact, just that single stroke. Videotaping painting process is interesting because you can look back and see all the things that you should have done differently. Just continuing, lightening things up, kind of trying to find a balance of where things should be. Adding a little bit more of that really warm highlight, that bounce light coming from the bottom that we talked about. But you can see that portrait really starts to come together in those final moments, huh? Those final highlights, really, they're miracles. I feel like I'm casting spells when I get to that point. And it's really the part of the painting that's just the funnest to do, huh? I wish I could start every painting, like all the things are in the right place, the general forms are there, and like the base colors are all there. And I'm just putting in these bright highlights, that super highlight on the cheek there. Very, very bright, almost white, very close to white. And then refining the edge of it. Very easy to do, right? You can just take a dry brush and pull away if you ever feel like you've extended beyond where you want to. And I'm going to continue. That's probably the most interesting part of the portrait. I still have the highlights in the eyes. There's another opposing light source highlight on the chin there that we added, and on the sort of under the lip here, where it kind of bulges out a little bit. But I'm still missing the highlight in the eyes, and those are going to be the most impactful ones. They're the real eye-catching highlights. They add a lot of depth to the portrait because it's the highest contrast area you usually have, where the highlight is probably going to be your brightest value, and it's encircled by, typically, at least in this case it is, the iris and the very dark parts of the eye. So it's a very dark part, and then a super strong contrast to the very bright highlight. And here they go. Bloop. And it's important to be tiny with it. This painting is so small, and you might be tempted to make these highlights a little bit bigger than they actually need to be because you're worried about it being so small and people aren't going to see it, but you got to just keep it together proportionally because it is going to work out in the end. Don't overdo those. Make them as small as they need to be. But yeah, so I'm just going to continue painting that, get through the end, and then I have to think about what I'm going to do next. The next part of the sketchbook is pretty interesting. That's where my mind is right now. Like, I think, pretty sure this is the 9th to last page, and I've got 8 more pages to go. And it's crunch time. I got to be a little bit more considerate about what I add into the book, and I'm thinking, what do I put next? Do they have to be important villains? Do you know what I mean? Like, do they have to be villains that are like the most classic villains that are out there, the ones that everybody's going to think about when they hear a villain? Or can they be still pretty obscure? Like the first few that I did were extremely obscure. And then, throughout I had some more obscure ones as well, just because the visually, right, the picture, the reference was interesting to me. And ultimately that's like the key decider, is the visual interesting? But 8 left to go, man. And I've been making lists in my mind of like who it should be, and especially the last page. Oh my God, the pressure that I'm going to feel for that last page. Not only does it have to be great, it's got to be like impactful. It's got to be maybe surprising. Would be fun to see like a last page surprise villain there. Stressful. Leave it in the comments. Oh man, if you've watched this far and you're hearing me right now, first of all, thank you. I don't know why, thank you. What do I get out of it? Yeah, I guess thanks for sticking around. That's cool that you're here. And tell me, who should be the final page in the sketchbook? Who should I even add in the next couple pages? And then I'm also thinking about painting the cover of the sketchbook, which would be pretty interesting. Do I paint another villain on the cover? Is there something else that goes on the cover? I've been thinking about putting a mirror on the cover. That would be pretty interesting, right? Now I've taken the clamp off, and now I'm going to start working up into that area. It's been clamped now for like an hour or something, hour and a half. I don't really know. I kind of sped this up a little bit. So I'm not sure quite how long it's gone, but it's around an hour. So you can already see even just an hour of clamping, it's already it's going to stay flat, and it's got that extra weight of the paint on top of it. So if you lay this sketchbook down flat, it's going to stay there. It's not going to accidentally close or something like that. And I'll go over that once the painting is all finished. But on the cover, I was thinking, what if I put a mirror on the cover? So when you see it, the biggest villain is you. Or self-portrait maybe at the very end. Could you imagine? And then I come out with the bombshell news that I've killed people. No, of course not. I would never. Just filling in the background now. Not much to go. And like I said, it's another opportunity to refine some edges, cut in some places that I might feel that I need to. Great reason to leave the background for the end sometimes, especially if you know what the finished composition is going to be like. There's no real need to put that background in immediately. After that background does go in, I go in with some final finishing touches on the actual portrait itself, and then the painting is done. Now, after you finish it, there's a big question of like what to do, right? It's still wet, and just because of the nature of the sketchbook, there's a worry that you might bump it and like accidentally close it and completely ruin the painting. So I've got this little, basically paper gift box that just so happens to be the perfect size for the open sketchbook. Look at that satisfying fit. Oof. And then I just leave it in there and wait for it to dry so I can work on the next page. And I also got a little lid that I can put on it in case I need to travel with it or store it. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Now it's just a matter of rinse and repeat for those final 8 pages that I have left to go. And like I said before, if you guys have any suggestions about who I should put in this book, what villains get those final coveted spots, definitely let me know. And I'll of course share every step of the way. If you follow me on Instagram, I always post each page once I finish it. And then, of course, can't wait to make that final full sketchbook tour video once the whole thing is completed. So look out for that in the future. But I hope you enjoyed this video, found it interesting, valuable, a good sleep aid, maybe. And I hope to see you soon. Bye.